Here. We're doing another live stream today, and this one is about whether reflexology is based in science. So if you have come to know reflexology, either you're a practitioner, you're just discovering things over time about how to treat your clients, which things are effective, which things are not, it might be very helpful to know that there is actually a growing body of evidence that can help you with developing treatment plans, that can help you with implementing different or more flexible protocols based on what others have done that have worked. There's also another part of why studies in reflexology are important and why we need more of them. A recent overview of reflexology and the medical profession, the current medical profession, in terms of whether medical practitioners, doctors, etc., will recommend reflexology or whether they use reflexology, is based on that there aren't really a lot of studies in reflexology to back up that it is actually an evidence-based protocol or an evidence-based modality. Okay, so what reflexology is, it is a map of the whole body at some other body area. So there are foot reflexology maps, hand reflexology maps, face reflexology maps, scalp reflexology, ear reflexology. And essentially what that means, there are more, what that means is at those given body maps or those little mini representations or the microcosm representations of the larger macrocosm body, what it means is that every single body part, every gland, every organ, so all the viscera, which means organs, it's all represented on this corresponding body map at the reflex level. If you treat those reflexes at the corresponding little mini map of the body, wherever you find it, if you're treating it as if those are kind of magic buttons that you're stimulating, either by pressure, sustained pressure, hooking, rotating, massage, whatever you're doing, so somehow stimulate those little buttons. And the idea is that it's a form of communication. Like if you're touching the liver reflex, hey liver, how you doing up there? If you're touching the shoulder reflex, hey shoulder, how you doing up there? Right, from the feet. So let's assume I'm doing a foot reflex. I'm pressing on a reflex for a particular body organ. It's just a way of asking that organ somehow through some mechanism of action, right? We don't exactly know how it works, but somehow a message is getting to the corresponding body part, and it allows the body to check into itself, to basically be mindful, right? So it allows the body to check into itself and see, can I release some tension here? Can I flush away some toxins? Can I bring in more circulation to this area? Can I bring more oxygen to this area? So it helps the body focus on itself. And then where the body does have its resources, when it does have the internal resources to self-correct, that's what a reflexology therapist is doing. Just stimulating certain points to help bring the body into awareness and checking if the body can actually go into some self-healing, okay, some self-regulating, some self-healing. And because it involves all body parts, including muscle, including fascia, including bones, so we have this whole structural component, but it also includes all of the viscera, which is all the organs. It includes all the glands, which basically are for hormones and hormone regulation, right? Producing and regulating and sending them off where they need to go at the right time in the right way. So because it does all of that, it actually helps the body to self-regulate into balance, a state of balance, which is kind of striving towards homeostasis, which we're already doing all the time anyway. And it's just enhancing the body's ability to bring itself to homeostasis or to balance when it can, when and where it can, when it's got the resources. So you've probably seen a very familiar foot reflexology map. I'll just pop one up for you so you're aware of it. And this is what a foot reflexology map would look like. This is ours from the Atlantic School of Reflexology. And you can see that it has every body part. These are shoulders, arm, superimposed with leg. Here's some organs. There's heart up in this chest area, brain at the top. The toes that represent the head and the neck. So brain at the top, cranium, neck. And then the arch is the abdomen, the abdominal area. And it's basically where all of your major organs are. So we have, I realize when we're recording, this is actually recording mirror image. So what you see, what would kind of logically be the right side where the liver is, might appear to you as the left. So just remember that it's mirror image. So this would be a liver on the right side. Here's the ascending colon in the lower body, to transverse colon going across to the other side of the body, and then sigmoid colon, okay, the end of the colon. So essentially, just take it from this, that these look like organs because they represent organs. And they appear in the feet as they appear in the body, right side or left side, above the waistline, below the waistline. So wherever something happens to be in the body, if a gland is in the head, the reflex for the gland is also going to be in the head. So there's pituitary right in the middle, pineal up here, hypothalamus, all parts of the brain. or glands. Okay, so that's just a really rough overview. You can look at any reflexology map at all. I just want you to get kind of an understanding, which you probably do since you're watching this, about what reflexology is. And then what I want to talk about today is, where are the holes in science backing up reflexology? Where is it backing up reflexology really well? So in order to do that, I want to go through some studies with you. And I want to just kind of allow you to know what is out there, what has been discovered, what is supported by science, and what's supported by science by relatively high level studies in terms of study criteria, like kind of the strongest type of studies. So we'll learn a little bit about what kind of studies exist, which ones are weaker, which ones are stronger, what types of things the studies have shown. And it'll be like a little bit random because I really just went online. How I look up studies the easiest possible way is, if I have a client who has MS, for example, multiple sclerosis, what I might do is go into Google Scholar and look up two terms, reflexology and MS, or Parkinson's, or postpartum care, so whatever it might be. And there's another really excellent resource, and it's called PubMed, because it's medical journals that have been peer reviewed and published. And so pubmed.gov is another really great place for reflexology studies. And you just type in your keywords reflexology and then whatever else you want to type in, or just randomly type in just reflexology and see what comes up, see what randomly comes up, because there's just a huge amount of stuff that's been published worldwide onto that site, and Google Scholar as well will help you with that. So those are kind of the two most obvious ones. There's a whole bunch of other areas that you can use as resources. So let me just introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Johnson. I founded the Atlantic School of Reflexology. As the name implies, we're in Atlantic, Canada, but we actually offer courses on a hybrid online format. So we do live online instruction for our classes, which means that if you were to take a class with us from anywhere in the world, of course, time zone will come into it because we're in Atlantic time zone, Atlantic Canada, but you would actually be in a classroom on Zoom, interacting with me, asking your questions immediately, having them answered immediately, interacting with other students, doing some projects together. And you also have the advantage of being watched while you work on a client. So while we're learning, while we are practicing, we have some times when we're working together, screen to screen, but then we also have appointment times that we arrange for our own clients to come into our space, our office, our home, wherever you're learning from as your classroom. And then I give you feedback about how you're actually doing your treatments and doing the protocols with the clients that you have with you during class. So that's our hybrid model. Is our meeting time is actually considered classroom time. Then you have a home study time where you're actually doing a practicum, actually implementing some protocols for treatment strategies, tracking results and seeing how effective your work is. And then you're handing that all in along with an assignment, a research assignment for clinical protocols and how to build treatment plans. And then you do exams. It might sound like a lot. It's actually a very short training for what you get at the other end, which is you can be a professionally practicing reflexologist in less than a year. We have access to all the video support for a year, access to office support. Actually, that doesn't run out. You still have access to office support afterwards. But anyway, so typically that learning process takes place within a year or shorter for some people if they really can invest the time in doing the practicums. So it's a professional certification course. It's a foundation course. We also have a ton of advanced courses. And what I want you to really kind of get into right now, especially if you are an actual practicing therapist that has come to join us and you're already certified, you're not looking for training, which is totally fine. I'm really hoping to help us bring reflexology to the next level. So we have a lot of current studies, a lot of current professionals from different modalities that are actually studying reflexology and designing studies that are really quite solid. And what's kind of the missing link there is, how does a reflexology therapist interpret those studies and then bring the findings into their own practice so that they can claim they're doing something that is an evidence-based modality, okay? An evidence-based modality basically means that it has gone through some stringent studies to rule out certain things, right? To kind of like compare reflexology treatment with a control group that doesn't get it, or maybe get something different like sham reflexology or fake reflexology, just a foot massage. And they compare what happens with the reflexology group versus the control group that doesn't get an actual reflexology session. And in different ways of setting that up, the study would be a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger. And when they do that based on a certain protocol and come up with a conclusion that says, hey, the reflexology group actually did better. They had less pain. They took less medication. They had better wellness factors. They had better reporting for, whatever it might be. And so we'll go over several of those with you so that you understand the scope of reflexology. And really, there is no area in healthcare that reflexology cannot assess or can't address, can't participate in. It is fully and completely complementary to all forms of medicine, holistic, alternative, traditional, conventional. So everything that you could do with the human body, reflexology can be an additional component that you can do to take something a little further or to look after another area of health in kind of a more holistic respect. Okay, so I've been running the Atlantic School of Reflexology since 1999, and I've taught internationally as well. Our courses are available internationally, so just keep that in mind. And I want to start with the idea of what is clinical reflexology? Why are we suddenly hearing this term clinical reflexology more than just certified reflexologist or reflexology therapist? And so it seems like more people are kind of dividing out how they approach reflexology. And they might say they're practicing relaxation reflexology, or they might say they're practicing clinical reflexology. We teach both, of course, but I teach from a clinical perspective because it's a lot easier to learn the harder thing first and then go to relaxation, which is still valid, than it would be to start with teaching with relaxation based and try and get yourself to clinical, which is a little more methodical. There are definitely protocols that you're implementing in terms of developing treatment plans, the right questions to ask to find out if they're working, things you can try. If something's not working, how are you going to change channels and get to something that does. All of which, of course, is going through this whole filter of whether the body has the internal resources, but there's always something that reflexology can do. A quick note on reflexology. When you hear someone saying reflexology, probably by default, they mean foot reflexology. It's the most well-known, it's the easiest to learn, and most of the studies actually are centered on foot reflexology. So you'll see that for most of the studies that come up, although there are still maps everywhere else, right? So we have our hand maps, our face maps, scalp, ear, fingers, body, and those would actually theoretically have the same results. Some might be a little bit better than others at certain things, but in general, probably the same results. So the studies that we'll be looking at will probably say foot reflexology. Okay, so a medical doctor who's really kind of at the forefront of studying reflexology and the mechanism of action or how it works, right? We up until now we have theories about how reflexology works, but really it's kind of difficult to prove like an exact method of action or like how this is actually happening. Like how do you push a button on the foot and it actually affects your kidney in your body? How do you just push an area in your foot and it actually helps your shoulder relax and bring more circulation to the area? So we may not know exactly the mechanics of this, but we do have a lot of hints. And some things have been proven in really interesting ways that I want to just kind of share with you. And so we are actually kind of getting to the point where we go, okay, that's really cool. And science is now kind of backing up what reflexologists have just claimed through experience and through results for years. Okay, so we're kind of coming to that point where people are basically proving what reflexologists already knew, but they didn't know why it was working. And there's still a lot of unknown here. So we are still, it's an ancient practice, but in terms of applying it to modern life, we have a lot of unknowns. It just works, which is why a lot of us are practicing. It just works, and why it's being has an increase in demand and more clients want to come see us. So if we want to look at a couple of things that are relatively new coming to the forefront, and I'll start with Dr. Manzanares, who is a medical doctor in Spain. And I did take a course with him at one point. And so one of the things that reflexologists will talk about is going to an area on the foot. Just grab my foot model. Okay, so let's say I want to work on a shoulder reflex. This is the shoulder reflex. That's the shoulder joint. The scapula comes across here. Muscles between the spine over here and the scapula right here. So that's like, muscles between the shoulder blades when it gets tight between the shoulders. Rhomboids, mid, trapezius. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So here's a shoulder reflex for the shoulder joint. Let's say your client has bursitis, or I have bursitis in my right shoulder joint. Okay. If I go to the shoulder reflex right here, which represents the joint, when I caterpillar or put pressure or do even like a pressure glide, when I'm applying pressure and when I'm palpating or feeling inside this reflex and stimulating that reflex, the client, and in this case, if it's me and my shoulder, I will probably feel that this reflex is actually sore. And as a therapist, touching the reflex, you might actually feel little tiny bumps or little tiny nodules. In reflexology, we call those deposits. So we are kind of, chasing or finding or searching for, palpating for those deposits or the tender areas, because that's how the body is saying, work here. This is where I'm having a problem. It's showing you there's an area of imbalance there. It's asking you to apply more pressure, more dedicated work, be more attentive at those areas. And those are the areas that the body's trying to clear energy from. Okay. Now, what is a deposit? Traditionally, in reflexology, we have been taught that a deposit is some form of crystal, like uric acid or possibly calcium deposit, that just forms at nerve endings and collects, especially in the feet because of gravity. And the idea was you wanted to try and break those up a little bit so that they could be tiny enough and then recirculate through the blood and be disposed of in regular circulatory action. So what Dr. Manzanares has come across, which is quite interesting, is he's actually been cutting open feet at the area where there's a deposit and putting that sample of tissue under the microscope. So he goes to tender reflexes that do exist, puts a little bit of an incision, and then tests out what that tissue is made of. Now, there's a couple of ways that he's formed his experiments, or when he's doing this, to kind of find this out. And I wanted to encourage you, like, you guys go look up Dr. Manzanares if you'd like to, because I might not be saying a study exactly as it is or how he's exactly done something. So I'm going to give you kind of the gist of it. It'll be something like this, based on memory. So he might actually, press the toe of someone who the toe represents the head. He may be working on the toe reflex for someone who absolutely has nothing happening, no problems, no imbalances with the head. They don't get migraines. They don't have muscle tension. So he's saying, do you have anything happening with the head area? They say, no, I don't. He palpates the toe, and there's nothing that really stands out as a tender reflex or a deposit. And then he's actually done something very interesting, which people let him do, is he creates an irritation. So he's actually done like a little under the skin injection, something that will irritate and cause a little bit of swelling, just water. And when he does this little injection and it causes a little bit of swelling, he'll go back to the reflex a little bit later and he'll work it and he says, okay, any tenderness? Like, oh yeah, that's tender. So he creates a tender reflex, or he creates the telling of an imbalance in the corresponding part by actually creating a problem here, and then it shows up in the reflex area. So he would go to take a tissue sample from here. He might go somewhere else and take a tissue sample next to an area that's not related to a problem area and compare the two sample areas. The sample tissue area that doesn't have an inflamed reflex or a deposit doesn't really show any difference from regular tissue. The one that is either a deposit or a tender reflex area, what it actually shows is it's just, body tissue. So there's all kinds of stuff in there, but there's actually a higher proliferation of nerve tissue. Okay, so like up to around 40%, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, of higher nerve generation at the little endpoints of the nerves. Which one theory is that those little deposits that we're feeling then are little tiny balls of nerves, of nerve fibers that kind of build up in these reflex areas that are tender. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting thing for finding out, that it actually is, at least to some respect, keyed into the nervous system. It actually does, when there's a tender reflex that indicates a corresponding body imbalance, that it actually does relate back to the actual nervous system, and that the nervous system itself is creating more nerve fibers of that area, kind of an irregular abundance of nerve fibers at a tender reflex area. So through his studies, he's really leaning towards that the mechanism of action for reflexology is actually the nervous system. We also have fairly, I say since I think 2008 maybe, some studies that are about the functional MRI readings when people are getting reflexology done. So a functional MRI reading is they're actually sensing activity at brain areas, specific brain areas, when they're testing the correlating reflexes on the feet. So testing the reflexes, and they check out these sensors at the brain, which part of the brain is actually reacting to this stimulus at the feet. And there's a ton of those that there are so many of them, and they're so interesting that I want to actually go through them study by study. So before I do that, before I actually jump in and start reading the studies, and kind of helping us navigate through studies and how we might do that and what we as therapists can draw from the studies and how it might influence our practice. Before I do that, I actually want to go through some of the layers of studies, like how effective a study might be, the strength of a study, what it actually proves or does not prove, or kind of leans us towards or doesn't. How strong is a study and what types of studies are there? Because there's so many. So imagine this. Imagine there's a hierarchy, okay, with the strongest type of study at the top and the weakest kind of study at the bottom. And if you're imagining this pyramid kind of structure or triangle, what this is showing you is that at the base of the triangle, the most numerous kind of so-called proof, the most numerous is actually the weakest in evidence. Okay, so in terms of evidence-based practices or evidence-based modalities, it's actually the weakest for proving that something works. And this would be something like, people just telling about their experiences, expert opinions. So it's basically conversational type stuff, anecdotal evidence. And even though there might be a massive amount of anecdotal evidence, does it actually prove out when it gets rigorously studied? So with reflexology, there is a massive amount of anecdotal evidence, a massive amount of professional opinions, like this is what my opinion is with my clients over the years. This is what's worked for us. We can recommend to one another what to try. It might work for someone else, but it also may not. So what's the next round of this in terms of a study becoming more vigorous? And the next thing up from kind of just your experience or professional opinion, the next one up is going to be case reports and then case studies. Case reports are strongly what reflexologists do in their training. So when you go through a reflexology training program, a foundation training program, ours is 300 hours. You need to do 65 practicum sessions where you are detailing a reflexology health record, where you've created a treatment plan, where you've taken down the symptoms of a particular condition or a goal that your client's trying to work with to improve. So and it's very much methodical. There's a method to this. So we have 65 practicum sessions with notes, so that by the time you hand that in, you now have, at least 6 people times 10 sessions each. Maybe you've, got a little bit different numbers, but something like that, where you've got, a person who has shoulder problems and you've done 10 sessions and you've brought them in when they had a 4 out of 5 of pain, and they finish at the end with a 2 out of 5 of pain, and they've gained mobility and they're sleeping better and they can lift things, so the quality of life is improving. Daily tasks they can perform better, reaching something on a high shelf. So you can actually track progression through different sessions in a day-by-day treatment summary based on your protocol, okay, based on the methodology that you're using. The next one up from that would be a case control study. And that's when a case study is compared with a group that doesn't have the same intervention. In this case, the intervention would be the reflexology, right? So someone who's just getting kind of regular care, maybe let's just say they're both taking ibuprofen or they've both been to physio and they're doing the exact same exercises. And then with the actual experimental group, the intervention group, they're also getting reflexology. And what makes it so that this control, so that there's like a group that's getting a reflexology treatment, a group that is not getting reflexology treatment, otherwise everything is the same, that means that shows you that the results that you might get on the reflexology side must be because of the reflexology, because they're compared with a control, okay? So these still, though, are kind of at the bottom because there are other factors that can influence a type of study, right? Personal belief systems, expectations, placebo effect. So there are all kinds of things can influence, and including placebo effect or expectations of the therapist, right? Or someone who's actually analyzing the data. So when that data comes in, if I have an expectation as a therapist that I want reflexology to work, or I just believe it does, I might see everything that's happened here through the filter of believing that reflexology works. So how do we filter out all those things and make a study stronger and stronger so that we can genuinely feel good about calling something evidence-based? And we can actually call on certain protocols that have been discovered to be effective for certain conditions. So as we move up the strength of studies, next thing we might come to is a cohort study. An observational study is what this one is, where you're just observing participants who share a common characteristic, and they compare their outcomes with a different cohort that doesn't have that characteristic. So we're talking about large numbers of people, a whole group of people that has a problem and uses reflexology versus a whole group of people that does not. And amongst that whole group, those two groups, which groups have favorable outcomes that are actually decreasing uncomfortable symptoms or increasing wellness, something specific to the problem that you're looking at. We move up and we get into randomized control trial. So this is where it starts to get interesting, because we're starting to eliminate expectations. We're starting to eliminate belief systems. We're starting to eliminate that the person who's doing the study can actually affect the outcome of the study based on what they might expect to see. So you're starting to actually it's the beginning of nobody really knowing what group they're in or what group they're analyzing. But it's just the beginning of it, because it's just the participants that don't know what group they're in. So you have maybe, let's say, the simple version of this is two groups within a study. One group that is the control group, which means they're just getting regular care, no reflexology. They might even do a control group like they're getting sham reflexology, pretend reflexology, right? Or like saying it's like a point that it isn't, or just doing a massage instead of foot reflexology. And then you do the other one and you do real reflexology. Well, those two people, those two groups, they don't know if they're the one that got the real treatment or the fake treatment, which also could be no treatment, right? They don't know if they're in a control or if they're in the actual group that's getting reflexology, getting the treatment. So that would be a randomized control trial. And we can get double randomized, where even the people that are carrying out the study don't know which group they're working with. So we do have, I think we've got an example of a double blind, but that would be stronger still. Okay, so we'll talk about that when it comes up, when I go through some of the studies. As we get to the top, or the peak of that pyramid for studies and the effectiveness of actually showing evidence, as we get to the top, we start to look at, okay, so even though we might have like masses of these case studies, or masses of opinion, or masses of experiential stuff, or just word of mouth, right? Like, this worked for me, you should try it, oh my God, it worked for me too. Okay, so that's, even though that might exist at the bottom rung, and it's a lot, it's still not really strong. As we move up, we have case studies, and we still have a lot of those, but again, still not super strong, because we haven't eliminated any other possibilities. Once we start moving up the triangle, we start moving up the pyramid. In the case of reflexology, because at least in North America, at least in kind of Western, or what we would kind of refer to as like Western medicine, Western world, at least it's still relatively new in terms of studies. Now, this is not necessarily true of Asian reflexology, or parts of the world where they might practice reflexology within medical programs, right? So there's a fair amount of studies within Iran that are like nursing with reflexology. There's a fair amount of stuff. In Germany, you have to be a medical practitioner of some kind before you actually take reflexology. And then, Taiwan, Japan, China. So a lot of reflexology studies coming from those areas where it has been very well established and has been cooperating and working operational within the medical system for a long, long period of time. So there are studies that come from there that are probably a little older, but we still need a whole lot more in terms of standardizing and making them strong studies. So North American studies are fairly new-ish, and we need a whole lot more. So what you'll find when you start going up that pyramid, where the studies become stronger, what you find is that, okay, there's a whole bunch of them out there, but once you read into them, you see that it says, yeah, reflexology was effective in reducing pain, but our sample size was really small. It was only a group of 20 people. Right? So if the sample size is really tiny, but you have a good significant result, well, what if just, out of an absolute random act, you got 20 people who had a particular thing that they also all shared that we didn't account for, and it was a coincidence. Okay, so with really tiny sample sizes, and inside of a study, the sample size, it'll say N, let's say N equals, I shouldn't draw in the air because this is mirrored, but pretend I just put an N equals in the air so you recognize it if you're visual. Anyway, that's what the sample size is. And the smaller the sample size, the less strength a study will have. And we also might have something that's kind of like a preliminary study, right? So it's like a study that wants to see, is there enough evidence here that would warrant doing a larger study? And that you'll see a lot of. That we see a lot of studies that they're kind of just starting off in this. They're going, okay, I wonder if we should study this more. So they design a small study, and they go, oh, hey, that actually does have really good results and could really help, the physiotherapy industry or the nursing industry, and it's easy to implement, and the patients have good outcomes in pain management and reducing anxiety or healing faster or taking less medication. So they might say, yes, this actually shows, even with a small sample number, that it is worthy of pursuing a larger study. So let's go design one of those. So a lot of the reflexology studies are in kind of that no man's land where we did the preliminary one and now we're waiting, right? Now we're waiting to get the larger ones to come in. But then where I left off was top of the triangle. So top of the pyramid, once you get up here, there are a couple of studies that are designed to pull together the literature or the studies that have already been done and do like a meta-analysis, like analyze all of them together, because together, if you pull all of those groups together, even if they might be small, you still actually end up with thousands of people as your N number, right? As your sample size. So if you look for particular key things that were shown in certain studies and you pull together those 25 studies and each of them had, 40 to 100 participants, now suddenly you have a larger sample size to make some bigger judgments over and to actually run some analysis on and come up with some conclusions. Okay, so those are the higher ones. Meta-analysis would involve aggregation of findings of multiple studies using quantitative data sets. The conclusions hold greater statistical significance. And finally, a systematic review is basically all the literature pertaining to a particular thing. So like the biggest collection of literature you can grab, what did all the studies say? And it collects, appraises, and summarizes all the available pertinent literature, so that meet their criteria, comprehensive, critically reviewed, right? Or it would be peer reviewed by other people who, go through the same kind of stringent criteria. Okay, so the studies that I have chosen for you guys actually appear in journals. So I'll tell you, I realized when I was going through some of them, I didn't actually write down, I didn't snag some of the journals names, so there might be a couple that I've missed out on. I'm not going to go into like a whole bunch of like, quoting and referring to all the resources, because what I want you to do, I'll just tell you the title of it. I'll tell you what I know about it. I really was kind of going for quantity, so I could just kind of grab stuff and really just show you a lot of examples about studies that back up reflexology and its effectiveness. So if you want to look something up on your own, I just want to put this right back onto you because it's actually really fun. But go into either Google Scholar or look up pubmed.gov. There's other clinical study and journal sites as well that you can come across. And there is also a resource in reflexology that's fantastic. Actually, this is the cover of the Reflexology Research Handbook from Manzanares. So that's an interesting one, but you can look stuff up online. And there's also, Kuntz and Kuntz have done this one. It's Medical Applications of Reflexology, where they have grouped together findings and research about post-operative care. Okay, so post-surgery, that people tend to heal faster, that they take less medication, that there's less pain, that there's less swelling. So a lot of post-operative reflexology studies that show that it's excellent to use after surgery. Also maternity care, so that would include things like fertility reflexology, pregnancy reflexology, and postpartum reflexology after the baby's been born. I don't know if they have any infant studies in this one, but I have a couple of infant studies that I'm going to show you as well, because reflexology is not, you don't have to be, of a certain age to have reflexology. You can definitely practice reflexology on an infant very safely. And there's some great infant studies there as well. One is going to be about babies who are born via moms who have been addicted or have addiction problems. And so, so the potential for the baby to be born with addiction exists. And there's some reflexology studies that are very promising there. And finally, the last category for this, the Kuntz book, Barbara and Kevin Kuntz, Medical Applications of Reflexology, the final category is cancer care. So reflexology and cancer care. And again, if you just went into, say, for instance, Google Scholar, and you typed in reflexology and cancer, you would have dozens of studies that are showing you how effective reflexology can be in different kinds of cancer, following different symptoms and following different criteria for analyzing like outcomes and, what they might be looking for, different stages, different groups of people. So it's really a valuable resource because it pulls those three groups together. It's a good thing to just have in your office. But what I want us to do is I want us to kind of learn how to read through these things ourselves so that you guys can go, okay, reflexology and Parkinson's, reflexology and Crohn's disease, reflexology and, right? So whatever it might be. And then through your scholarly search engine, then actually have some studies that show you what the reflexology conclusions were from certain studies, which the really valuable part is, if it does show that, yes, it was significantly helpful, the really valuable part is they've probably described how they did it. They might have said, we did a 10-minute session once a day for 14 days. They might have said we did reflexology twice a week for 15 minutes each time for 3 weeks. So when you know that something has actually been helpful for a particular condition that maybe one of your clients has, or if you're not a reflexologist yet, one of your future clients or someone in your family, once you know that, then you can kind of implement that same type of protocol. And some of them even tell you which reflexes they worked. Okay, now some of them don't. Some of them just say reflexology in general using the body map, or some of them might search for tender reflexes and work on a tender reflex. Some of them are definitely using landmarked exact reflexes, or some of them might just say like generally the big toe. Okay, so I'm going to help us through some of that, but I want you to keep your mind very open. A lot of people that have reflexology training have simply come across in their textbook maybe a list of here are key reflexes that you work for a certain condition. So maybe it lists migraine and then there's a list of reflexes that you work and why. Well, we're going to open that up some more. Okay, so we're going to open it up so that you do have some therapeutic judgment that you can introduce some flexibility and introduce a different method and see if you can break through a plateau, for instance. Like how far can you take this with one of your clients in symptom relief? Okay, so if you're just joining us today, we're talking about reflexology and whether it's based in science. Just a little brief intro about who I am, Jennifer Johnson, founder of Atlantic School of Reflexology, that we do offer courses. And we went through a couple of resources, a few people that are kind of at the forefront of the field for researching reflexology, but that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Then we talked about what would be helpful and why it would be helpful to have evidence-based studies behind reflexology that might actually help integrate reflexology into the current medical model better than just someone thinking it's something alternative. It actually is completely complementary. It's not alternative, could be used alternatively, but amazing complementary modality. And so we went through the different levels of studies and what makes a really strong study. Okay, so now I just want to kind of break off of that, and I want to go into just going over some studies with you. So I'm just going to read some studies. They're kind of random. I really just like typed in reflexology studies. I tried to get stuff that was relatively recent, and I'll show you what kind of things I'm looking for when I'm reading through some of those. Don't think for a second that I don't use Google to look up terms I don't know. I absolutely do. When you're a reflexologist and you've been through reflexology training, you may not have a medical background. Turns out that I have taken other things. I've taken some science background, training, massage therapy, etc., anatomy, physiology, pretty extensively. So I can understand most of it, but there's always something that catches me. But it's as valuable if you don't have that training yet to become familiar with some of the terminology. Don't be afraid to Google something you don't know. It's completely fine. Because once you kind of figure out what the title means of the study, especially if you've Googled reflexology and Parkinson's because you have a client that you want to work on with Parkinson's disease, then there might be a few words that you don't quite understand. Just Google them. It'll come together. It'll make sense. And usually there's an abstract at the beginning, which kind of breaks down what this particular study is about. It's like a summary of the study. So the abstract is the first thing you'll come across. It's usually pretty easy to read, including there's sometimes just introductions to like what is reflexology and what is Parkinson's disease and why are we looking at this question. Then there'll be something that's kind of the design of the study. That one I would say look into that. Now there might be a lot of words in when you're looking at the design of a study that you may not be familiar with, because frequently in the design of the study they're going to talk about what the sample size was, or they'll say N equals, how many people were involved, where those people came from, how they selected them. They might also talk about how they measured the results. And frequently those are like different scales or different standardized questionnaires or standardized measurement approaches that amongst the study community or the medical community, they would be familiar with those, right? So they would use like a particular kind of index that has a name, right? Which is a standardized thing for like maybe a pain scale response, so that everyone who's trying to follow this pain scale, if they say which pain scale standardized version they used as a feedback form from the clients, everybody goes, oh yeah, that pain scale. So it's not just totally random. It's not just totally subjective. There is actually a method involved in this standardized questionnaire. Okay, so you might see names of things, or this is the method we used. Don't worry so much about that. It probably just means that it's a standardized way of measuring that they've used, and they're explaining that to the science community, how they've measured the outcomes or how they've measured their analysis. Okay, so then after that, after you do kind of your synopsis, at the abstract, and they're talking about designing the study, pay attention to how long did they do reflexology, over how many sessions, over what duration of time, what period of time, 1 week, 2 weeks, 5 days, 3 months, and then how many sessions and how long were the sessions. Because if they do have a favorable outcome, if the conclusion says yes, reflexology was effective and did help these people, this particular patient population, then you might want to implement those. You might want to bring those in and not just stay with the standard 45 minutes to an hour where you do 45 minutes of a routine and then 15 minutes of a treatment protocol and finish with a nice massage. You might want to actually implement 15 or 20-minute reflexology sessions more times to kind of get a particular outcome, if that's something that has been shown to have worked for other people with similar conditions. So be aware of that, how they do it, so that you can start trying different things in your practice. Okay, so once we figure out that, how many they're doing, how the study is designed, what measurement tools they're using, just go straight to the conclusion. Just jump to the conclusion, which is probably next at the very beginning, like right after the abstract. And if you do read an entire study, it'll go through the study in great detail. They might have graphs and charts. And then at the very end, the last paragraph is probably like the overall conclusion. But if you skip straight to the conclusion, it's usually 2 or 3 lines that tells you that it worked, right? Or that it didn't, if it didn't work for a certain thing. Or they might be measuring 2 different outcomes. Like let's say they're measuring pain relief. Did it diminish pain? And maybe the second thing is, did it increase quality of life? And maybe they'll say, yes, it did diminish pain, but no, it didn't improve quality of life. I mean, that seems unlikely, but pretend it's 2 things that make sense that way. So anyway, so they might be measuring a couple things. One thing might be like, yeah, totally reflexology worked for this one, and it's obvious. And the other one like, not so much, not really that different from the control group. So it's possible there's a no. Don't worry about it. So go straight to the conclusion. It will be pretty clear, couple lines, and it will tell you that reflexology, how reflexology helped. And then if it is something that's a relatively small study, then it will say this warrants further study in this direction because it could be implemented into physiotherapy practices, nursing practices, massage therapy practices that could help a population or could help children with hyperactivity or could help, this population that has this problem. Okay, so that's usually in the conclusion as well. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to start with, let's start with a couple of studies that I have in front of me here. So this one is it's from the Journal of Complementary Therapy in Clinical Practice. It's a 2019 study, and it's called Comparing the Effects of Auricular Seed Acupressure and Foot Reflexology on Neonatal Abstinence Syndrome. So there's already a fair amount of words there. Just a sec. A modified double-blind clinical trial. That's the whole title. So there's a whole title right there. Right? I just like mark and circle things, but it's pretty long. Anyway, what this study is looking at, what neonatal abstinence syndrome is, it's babies who are born with addiction because when they were growing in the womb, their mom was, ingesting drugs or, pharmaceuticals, whatever it might be, but babies who are born with some kind of a substance addiction. Okay. And the question here is, it's actually an interesting question because it's comparing to CAMs, or complementary alternative modalities. It's comparing ear acupressure using seeds and reflexology, pressure applied to the feet, reflexology massage. Okay. Now, if I want to just show you the shortcut here, let's say you had to look up what this neonatal abstinence syndrome was. Let's say you had to look that up. You figured out, okay, it's babies who might be born with addiction, substance addiction. And then you go, okay, well, you even skip over what the methods were and how many people were involved. And you just go, well, was it? Then you can skip immediately to the conclusion or the findings, and it would say the mean score of abstinence symptoms for the foot reflexology intervention, which means the group that received reflexology, significantly reduced. The change in the mean score of foot reflexology was significantly greater than the score from the seed acupressure. And it says both foot reflexology and auricular seed acupressure has significant effects on abstinence symptoms. Of course, 15-minute seed acupressure is less effective than 15-minute foot reflexology, while 24-hour seed acupressure is as effective as 15-minute foot reflexology. So they did it in 15-minute increments, okay, in alleviating abstinence symptoms. So they did help babies who had symptoms of addiction. Now, if I back up, so that's just how I can read a title, figure out what the title says and then jump straight to the conclusion and go, huh, cool. But what I've missed here is, was it a relatively large sample size? Was it a study that's a preliminary study that's going to lead to a greater study? Was it like a large sample size? What type of study was it? How strong is this? But we do know that certainly it was significant and that yes, reflexology did alleviate symptoms, and it did it with 15 minutes reflexology versus a 24-hour, equal to a 24-hour period of wearing little ear beads on the acupressure points. So in terms of this one, it says 31 neonates or 31 newborns of addicted women were purposely recruited and randomly allocated through coin flipping to receive either foot reflexology and then seat acupressure, or seat acupressure and then foot reflexology. And they left time in between them both to see what each of them was in comparison. And they switched group to group and did it the other way to see how they compared. And that's how they got the results. Foot reflexology was applied for 15 minutes. Symptoms of absence syndrome were assessed using, and then they tell you, remember I told you you might have like a standardized kind of feedback form. And so it was the Finnegan neonatal abstinence scoring system. So you don't necessarily have to know all those things. I just know that that's going to be something standardized within the medical community. Okay. And before and after their foot reflexology. Okay. So the conclusion was yes, that it did work. And they actually said what the time frames were for both foot and acupressure. So the acupressure, equal time, foot reflexology, much better, a longer time for acupressure, and equals 15 minutes for reflexology with the beads. Okay, so there's one. If we move on to a different one, this one is from the Journal of Clinical Hypertension. So we're talking about high blood pressure. And it is known that reflexology does help with blood pressure. It helps regulate blood pressure. It helps to actually stimulate circulation. And I think I've included some studies here that show that. But for a long period of time, that has been generally accepted about reflexology, that it increases circulation. And specifically, even when you press a reflex to an organ, then measure the circulation to that organ, like how much blood is flowing and the diameter of the blood vessels, that there is actually a change and it does bring more blood, which automatically means it's going to bring more oxygen. It's going to, deliver more hormones or whatever happens if you're traveling in the blood, right? And then circulation could also include lymph circulation, which is kind of the bath water of the cells in the body that also has a vascular network like the blood system does. So in this one, this is Journal of Hypertension, specifically about blood pressure. And the title is The Effects of Foot Reflexology on Blood Pressure and Heart Rate, a randomized clinical trial in stage 2 hypertensive patients, okay, people with stage 2 high blood pressure. This one is a study from 2021, so relatively recent. And the abstract says foot reflexology has been proven to decrease blood pressure, but data are limited in patients with actual stage 2 hypertension. So it's a randomized clinical trial to examine the effectiveness of foot reflexology in reducing blood pressure and heart rate in stage 2 hypertension patients. So it says N equals 47 each, 47 people in each group, which means the people that were receiving the intervention, which means the reflexology treatment, versus 47 people that were not. Okay, so that's the control group. They both received their regular care. Okay, so they're both receiving regular care for hypertension, and one group gets reflexology to see if this makes a difference and changes between the two groups. Only the reduction in heart rate was significant. We conclude that foot reflexology was effective in reducing heart rate in stage 2 patients and partially effective in reducing blood pressure. And sorry about the control group. I forgot to tell you this part, kind of important. The control group got relaxation. So they were able to rest. So the people came in and one group was told, go rest and relax. And the other group was given foot reflexology. So between the control group and the reflexology group, there actually was not a difference in the actual blood pressure because both rest and reflexology help blood pressure come down. So there wasn't a difference between the groups. And what that tells us is that reflexology is as good as deliberate rest and relaxation, as good as. And then in heart rate, it actually decreased heart rate. So that's the thing that actually kind of stood out amongst both of them, just with relaxation or with relaxation plus reflexology, or sorry, just the reflexology. reflexology was as good as relaxation in blood pressure, better than relaxation for actual heart rate. Okay, so their conclusions here are that yes, this is something we should pursue for people that have hypertension. And again, when you look at the medical system, some of the things that we can extrapolate, or some of the things that we can really kind of operate into with some really great questions are, complementary medicine works with regular medicine with an added effect. So is it better to just have straight up conventional care, or can you add to it with something that also has an effect and increase positive outcomes, right? Increase diminishment of symptoms and maybe stabilize a condition, or in some cases actually have the body fix a condition. And then, so in which groups would it be warranted? Would that be more cost effective? Is it something people can do to themselves? And yes, it is. And and is there any kind of toxicity with taking too much medication or increasing medication? Maybe you can kind of stay at the same level, but do reflexology in addition to help with that, and have less interactions or less symptoms based on medication. So there's all kinds of stuff that, if this was a cooperative, genuinely complementary and holistic kind of relationship that current medical system and reflexology was to have, these are great questions that could be tried with a team, for instance, a more holistic team working with someone with their health challenges. Okay, the next one that I'm going to read, this one is going to be, it's from a French journal. It's called Bulletin du Cancer. Sorry that my French is so bad. But so that's a journal, it's a cancer journal. And it's evaluation of efficacy and feasibility of foot reflexology in children experiencing chronic or persistent pain. This one is very close to my heart because I've had children as clients. Reflexology for kids is a growing specialty. Parents are looking for natural ways to help their children, or for complementary and holistic ways to augment treatment that their children might be receiving elsewhere. So this is something that is growing. It's a specialty area that is a beautiful and rewarding specialty area. And there is actually evidence that backs up that this is a valid specialty area and one that is needed. Okay, so this is, how effective is reflexology when it's used to help children with chronic pain or persistent pain? Now, they define persistent pain as under 72 hours, and they define chronic pain as over 3 months. So something that lasts over 3 months, chronic pain. Okay, so complementary and alternative medicines, or CAM, C-A-M, are increasingly used in the therapeutic arsenal, particularly for pain management. And reflexology has an excellent track record for pain management. Foot reflexology is still poorly evaluated. True. Specifically in the pediatric population. True. 2 pediatric centers, here's the methods. 2 pediatric centers from January 2011 to 2014 is where this took place in the hospital. And it was offered to children who had persistent pain, which is under 72 hours, and chronic pain, which is over 3 months. And then they used, in particular, they mentioned the tracking method, right? Their questionnaire, like what they were following, is a standardized form. So 122 patients suffering from persistent pain and 70 patients suffering from chronic pain took place in this study. And what they found was children suffering from the persistent pain, there's significant decreases in pain, in their pain scores after each session. And they found that for chronic pain, children suffering from headache and musculoskeletal pain, which is anything to do with, the framework of the body, muscle, bone, fascia, etc., and would also include any of the arthritis, like anything that affects that kind of structural components of the body, that pain was helped as well. In addition to that, anxiety was significantly lower in the children who received reflexology after each session. So here's the conclusion. 192 pediatric patients for reflexology significantly reduced pain and anxiety in children suffering from persistent or chronic pain. This CAM could have a place in pain management in children, but needs to be evaluated in larger cohorts, right? We need more studies. So this one with this many children, about 200, says, yeah, super effective. They all actually benefited. Everyone's pain decreased. But it says, now let's design something that's bigger and better so that it can really be accepted by medical community and have more cooperation and working and using these techniques and methods. Okay, if you're just joining in, if you're bored, you can just jump off anytime you want to. But honestly, like I love these studies so much, and I'm just going to keep going into some of them. But I do want to actually, when we go through some of the studies, I want you to think, if you're a therapist or if you're an aspiring therapist, I want you to think like, how would this affect your clients' lives if you really could actually back this up with your own hands, with your own therapy, right? And then soon I'm going to go through a few more little random ones, but then I'm going to talk about the functional MRI studies. And that's when it gets really interesting, because we really are tracking the brain and seeing what the brain is doing as you're applying pressure to certain reflexes, to specific reflexes. And some of them even tell you just exactly what reflexes to work. So it gets even more interesting. Although I love every step of the way, it's hard for me sometimes to know if my own excitement is just mine. But I'll go through a few more anyways, and then we'll get to the functional MRI stuff, okay? So this next one is from, it's a Latin American journal. Again, my pronunciation is going to be horrible. Revista Latinoamericana de Enfermagem. So that's the journal name. Sorry, I butchered it. The title of this is Foot Reflexology in Feet Impairment of People with Type 2 Diabetes Mellitus, Randomized Trial. Okay, so we do know from word of mouth, from case studies, from like just a really large amount of data from people attesting to that it works for diabetes, that reflexology is a great approach for people who have diabetes. And we know this because of experience. But in terms of an actual study, remember, that's the least credible kind of feedback, because are there factors that we haven't ruled out? But if reflexology helps with circulation, then certainly it's going to help with circulation, which is one of the problems for people who have diabetes, especially in the lower legs. And you're definitely addressing that by touching the feet, even if it's just by the foot massage itself. But we know that reflexology increases circulation. So overall, that's going to be one big part of it. It also addresses organs. So yes, it addresses the pancreas. It also addresses body parts. So yes, it addresses the eyes, which could also be something that's affected by diabetes. So it's global. It can help with, just overall boosting immunity. So these things are, even if someone has a pancreas that does not have enough insulin producing cells to make more insulin when it's stimulated, they might genuinely be insulin dependent. Okay, this is the type 2. It can still help with things like wound healing, with keeping circulation running, with pain management, especially if they have neuropathy. So it is a valid approach, even if the body doesn't have the resources to correct the actual problem happening in the pancreas itself about creating insulin. Okay, so diabetes and reflexology, very well known to be a great partnership. Let's read what the study has to say in this particular case. So foot reflexology in feet impairment of people with type 2 diabetes mellitus, randomized trial. This is from 2015, so again, relatively recent. And it says that we have a treated group in which there are 21 people and a control group that didn't get treatment, 24 people. And this one is so interesting to me because they use self-care. They taught the people how to do their own reflexology, which can completely be done and is valid. I've written an article about 3 studies in detail about self-delivered reflexology and the outcomes of those, which is really good. And part of our practicum at the Atlantic School of Reflexology in our foundation program is that you're doing 5 reflexology sessions on yourself, self-delivered, tracking a symptom of a particular condition as you're working on yourself. So we are working on ourselves in our training, and you are encouraging your clients to work on themselves between sessions, and it can be taught, even if it's just a couple of reflexes that are pertinent to what they're experiencing. Okay, so that's what's interesting about this one, is it's actually a study about self-delivered, specific to people who have diabetes who can work on themselves. One are receiving reflexology and one is not. And when it says participants who received the reflexology therapy showed better scores in some impairment indicators related to skin and hair growth, elasticity, turgor, hydration, perspiration, texture, and integrity of the skin, and skin peeling. Okay, so those were improved in people who did regular reflexology on themselves. Conclusion, the foot reflexology had a beneficial effect on feet impairment of people with type 2 diabetes, which makes it a viable therapy, deserving investment. The study was registered with the Brazilian Registry of Clinical Trials. Okay. Okay, so I have this next study, which is comparison of single and combined effects of nature sounds and foot sole reflexology massage on the level of consciousness in traumatic comatose patients. These are people who are in a coma. And is it relevant to do a foot reflexology treatment on someone who is non-responsive, who is in a coma? And they have several measurement things to see what does this affect. And several parts of it did not affect. But a really cool thing that happened through this study is the people that received reflexology, even though at the time of receiving reflexology, it wasn't showing much was happening. As a group, people who were in a coma who received reflexology came out of a coma faster. Okay, so that is a pretty interesting finding. And that finding, so that was from Holistic Nursing Practitioners, Journal of Holistic Nursing, June 2019, if you want to look that one up. There's a second study that also says something very similar. It was a study based in Iran. It was from 2014. It says comatose patients from brain injury, in which they had 40 patients in the ICU in the hospital. They did 5 minutes of reflexology twice a day for 2 weeks. They used a particular standardized measurement factor, which is the Glasgow Coma Scale. There was significant improvement in consciousness levels in reflexology group, and they do recommend reflexology for coma patients or for patients who have brain injury. Okay, so those two are for reflexology for people who are in a coma or who have brain injury. Okay, next up, comparison of the effects of reflexology and relaxation on pain in women with multiple sclerosis. So if any of this is hitting you that, oh, I have a client who has multiple sclerosis, or my mom has multiple sclerosis, or, if you can think of anyone that you know, try and think of what they experience. Try and think of what their symptoms are. Part of training in terms of doing clinical reflexology is actually researching symptoms for certain conditions and then doing a really solid interview with your client to find out exactly where they're at and what your starting point is. And then you know what their client goal is also from the interview, and you track changes based on your client's goal, okay, using proper health record keeping and a key reflex protocol for treatment plan. So for this one, for the effects of reflexology on relaxation and on pain, for women with MS, we have, it's a single-blind randomized clinical trial performed on 75 patients with MS, and it's happening through an MS clinic in the hospital in Iran, so it's another Iranian study. They have 3 different groups that they're comparing here. The first group is reflexology. That's the reflexology intervention. The second group is just some kind of relaxation, okay? They're helping them relax. So relaxation is one of the key factors of reflexology, and they want to know, okay, is relaxation from reflexology the same as general relaxation? And they're comparing those 2 groups. And the third group is like nothing, right? They're not doing anything different to that group at all, and that's the control group. So the control group received routine care and medical treatment as directed by a doctor. And the results. There was significantly higher reduction in pain intensity scores in the reflexology group after intervention compared with the 2 other groups. So reflexology had the highest pain relief, okay, reduction in pain. But no significant differences between relaxation and control. So just relaxing and the control group, no difference in pain levels, but reflexology group to the other 2, definitely a decreased pain level. Conclusion, the results show that both interventions are effective on relieving pain in women with MS, but it appears the effect of reflexology on pain reduction is greater than that of relaxation. I must have missed a little part there where there was some. Hence, these 2 methods can be recommended as effective techniques. Okay, so this one, effective reflexology on pain reduction is greater than that of relaxation. Effects of foot reflexology applied in 2 different methods on symptom control in colorectal cancer patients. Okay, so now we have a cancer, colon cancer, colon and rectum. And so 3 groups again, classical foot massage, reflexology, and standard care control. The clinical massage group received foot reflexology, focusing on symptom-oriented reflexes twice a week for 5 weeks. So that's a good example of how you might implement this if you're trying this. And it happened during the chemo and radiation schedule as well. So they were doing it in addition to their chemo and radiation. The classical massage was effective in reducing pain level and distension, which is kind of swelling of the gut area, while foot reflexology was effective in reducing pain and fatigue level, lowering the incidence of distension and urinary frequency, and improving quality of life. So we had more outcomes with foot reflexology than with just relaxation. Okay, so I think I'll actually stop there. I could just keep going. There's one with reflexology and Parkinson's. So let me just encourage you to look these up, because everything that I picked was relatively easy to grab. I literally spent an hour and just like grabbed a few studies and printed them all out, stuck them in a Word document and printed them. And then now I'm just kind of going through them, right? So you can do the same thing. This one's about quality of sleep after kidney transplant. It says, yes, it does help with quality of sleep after surgery and reduces pain. And it says reflexology and Parkinson's disease, possible benefits. And then actually the Parkinson's Society actually also adopted this and said, yeah, hey, reflexology could be really helpful. Complementary therapies and clinical practices. Can reflexology maintain or improve the well-being of people with Parkinson's disease? And it says that, oh, I do want to read this one because it's important. Reflexology works best when it's done cumulatively, right? When it's ongoing. So you should think about reflexology as a therapy as you would think about the health benefits of going to the gym or exercising regularly. Okay, so if you just like bang out one exercise once a month and then you don't exercise anymore, then you're not going to really get the same exercise benefits that everyone says are happening with exercise in general. And it's the same thing with reflexology. If you bang out one session every now and again, really randomly, versus doing it on a regular basis, which also means you can do it to yourself, right? It doesn't always mean you're paying out every single time. Your clients have to, get all these sessions from a professional every time. But as a professional, you can show your clients what to work on between sessions so they can still have a regular cumulative benefit. But what I wanted to read you about this one, which is why I do actually want to cover it, it's can reflexology maintain or improve well-being of people with Parkinson's disease? It says they did 8 therapy sessions to 16 people with varying degrees and varying intensity of symptoms for their Parkinson's. In the active treatment phase, while they were receiving these reflexology sessions over that period of time, for over the period of time, 8 therapy sessions, then yes, there was pain reduction. And it said the results reflected the progressive nature of Parkinson's disease deterioration over time. So it's actually a progressive disease that's going to continue to deteriorate over time. But there was an improvement in well-being over the active therapy phase. These results suggest that continuous 2 to 3 weekly reflexology may limit further deterioration or maintain improvement of well-being. A further study is indicated to test this hypothesis. So it says it really does attest the importance of ongoing, because while they were getting those 8 sessions, that period of time, it was helpful. Okay, and it potentially even contributes to slowing the progression of what would otherwise be a progressing disease. Okay, so that's an important thing to study more, and it's a great preliminary study. Another one here about reflexology for spasticity and muscle function for children with cerebral palsy who receive physiotherapy. This one specifically, again, has 3 groups, and they are receiving physiotherapy. And when the physiotherapist added in reflexology, it did help with the muscle function of both the gastrocnemius and the soleus muscles that are in the lower leg. Okay, so they're saying, okay, if you're a physiotherapist, doesn't it warrant learning about reflexology, because you can just incorporate those relatively quickly. It doesn't have to take a lot of time into your treatment strategy, and children were having positive benefits from that. Okay, so now what I want to do is now move into the part that I was talking about. I wanted to talk about the functional MRI area of study for reflexology, because this is kind of like the new direction that reflexology is going, where they really want to see what's happening in the brain when you're pressing on certain reflexes, and how does that information actually get to an organ itself or a gland? Like, how is this actually working? So they have done actual kind of brain pictures and showing you, charts of like, here's what I pressed on the foot, here's what happened in the brain. And so this is an article that kind of pulled a lot of these things together, and then I grabbed a few others. But it's an article called Scientists Use Functional MRI, or it could also be like a small f and then capital MRI, to validate reflexology tenets, okay, the beliefs about reflexology, or the claims that reflexologists have made. And so functional MRI is now basically proving that what reflexologists have been saying does have validity. And so one of them is functional, one of them was brain reflexes, that you would stimulate on brain reflexes around the toes. So again, if I grab a foot here, this is a left foot. I know it's mirror image, so it might not look it, but on the left foot, the left brain is at the top of all the toes, but the main one is the big toe. And the brain reflexes are the only ones that are actually switched. They're the only ones that are opposite. So the left toe reflex for brain actually refers to the right brain, okay? And it crosses over. Well, this study for functional MRI proves that. When they stimulate the brain reflex on the opposite toe, the opposite brain lit up, okay, where they kind of expected it would. There's another one that compared foot reflexology and electroacupuncture work. And it says that when they were actually working on the adrenal gland reflex, a predictable part of the brain lit up. And the activation in the insula demonstrated, it's the area of the brain, that's the one that actually it governs emotion, it governs viscera or organs, and that lit up. Then we had the fMRI study showed that reflexology stimuli activates other areas of the brain, one of which receives information about sensory information, such as pressure to the feet. And so what they ended up doing is when they pressed the kidney reflex, and actually they press a couple of different reflexes, but there's one that's the kidney reflex. So it's functional MRI and reflexology. It's a 2011 study, and they hooked up parts of the brain, right? The part that says, hey, I feel something's happening to my foot, and then the part that governs the kidney, wherever that is. And so they pressed then just the kidney reflex, nothing else. And yes, the part of the brain that says my foot's being touched, that lit up. And the part of the brain that governs the kidney, that lit up. Okay, so you're just touching a kidney reflex that corresponds to the kidney in the body. And the brain says, you're touching my foot, you're doing something to my kidney. Okay, both of those things happen. So somehow it's actually keyed into this nervous system, and then the message actually gets to the kidney itself. Then we had a couple of Austrian functional MRI studies. The first one, again, that Austrian was the kidney, applied to the kidney reflex area. The second one was demonstrating a change in blood sugar when they worked on the pancreas reflex. So all of these can really help with understanding for reflexology and organ connection, and also because the area of the brain that lit up the most also deals with pain, then it can also be a big key to how to understand reflexology and pain. So all of these are saying, hey, this actually worked. Let's look more in this direction. There's something called a somatotopical relationship between cortical activity or brain activity and reflex areas in reflexology. And somatotopical relationship means certain body regions correspond to motor areas of the brain. Okay, so this is exploring the motor areas of the brain that relate to a body part and the part of the foot that has the reflex in it that relate to the same organ or body part. Okay, so we examined the somatotopical relationship between cortical activity or brain activity and sensory stimulation of reflex areas in reflexology using functional magnetic resonance imaging. They did it to the eye, to the shoulder, and to the small intestine. And again, this one showed, same thing, a statistical analysis showed that the reflexology stimulation of the foot reflex areas corresponding to eye, shoulder, and small intestine activated not only the somatosensory areas corresponding to the foot itself, which is the thing that's getting touched, but also the somatosensory areas corresponding to eye, shoulder, and small intestine. So yes, it did. Okay. Okay, here's another one. This is from Journal of Psychoneuroendocrinology. Endocrinology is hormones, study of glands and hormones. And it's from 2019, relatively recent. It says foot massage evokes oxytocin release and activation of the orbitofrontal cortex and superior temporal sulcus. Okay, all this means here is that, and it actually doesn't say reflexology, it says foot massage, but it says that foot massage actually does stimulate oxytocin or feel-good hormone. Okay, so that's what that study says. So add in that even if you're not doing reflexology and you were just touching feet, we already have oxytocin release that's related to that. Blood samples is what they took, and they showed within from the blood samples that yes, there was an increase in the hormone oxytocin following only 10 minutes of treatment. Okay, now I'm just going to read a couple of titles here. I won't drag them all out, but I just want you to know again what's out there because these parts are fascinating to me. The effects of reflexology on child health. There's a systematic review. It says that reflexology is effective for children in decreasing pain, in regulating heart rate, in increasing oxygen saturation, in relieving colic symptoms in babies, and also in neonatal abstinence, which is the addiction that babies could be born with, which we already read about in a study. So this is kind of like a systematic review of pulling together a bunch of studies that say, okay, is reflexology viable for kids? Can it help kids in pediatric medicine? And yes, is the answer to that one. And then reflexology and polysomnography, that's a big old word, changes in cerebral wave activity, changes in brain waves induced by reflexology promote N1 and N2 sleep stages. This study proves that reflexology actually helps us get a deeper, more restful sleep, which again keys into the anti-fatigue factor of reflexology that helps relieve fatigue because you're getting a deeper, more quality sleep. Okay. I'm going to bring all these last things together in the last little bit of functional MRI thing and talking about the studies, because there were some questions about the previous MRI studies. Was it designed well enough that it wasn't being influenced by belief? Okay, that it wasn't being influenced by some other factor. And so, so this particular study is called Activity in the Primary Somatosensory Cortex, so brain activity, okay? Induced by reflexological stimulation, reflexology, is unaffected by pseudo-information, which in this case means wrong information. So they actually designed a study, a functional magnetic resonance study, functional MRI, where they had clients who did not know reflexology, and they told one group the truth about locations of reflexes, and they told one group lie. They actually told truth and lie to both of them, but they switched it. So once they told them where the real eye reflex was, but where a fake shoulder reflex was, and then they do the opposite to the other person, and the next round they would switch it up again. And in every time, regardless of what the person thought the real one was, it didn't matter what they thought. If they were thinking the wrong thing, it didn't influence what the body did. And the body gave the proper signals every time for the shoulder and for the eye, right? Whether they were told the correct information or whether they were not told the correct information. So the body still did what the body was predictably going to do if this reflexology stuff works, and actually lit up parts of the brain that have to do with the eye and the shoulder when those reflexes were stimulated, regardless of what the clients who are receiving this or the subjects believed. Okay, so I'll leave it there for you guys. I really hope that was something that I just wonder, like, is it my own brain that just works this way? Am I really just droning on it? It's boring. Or are other people as excited by this as I am? There are just so many out there. I literally could probably just sit here and just drone on and on. But maybe you're going to sleep with me, just kind of like, chatting in your ear as you're laying your head on the pillow. That's totally fine, as long as it somehow gets in there. What I really hope for you is that you're excited enough to just start typing in your own queries, to actually go look for studies yourself. Try to read through some of them, read the abstract, read the conclusion, just so you can get an idea of what's out there. And the more you can play with what your actual treatment plan is, or use these studies even in part of your practicum or as you're learning, or to inspire you to learn, is that there are so many reported benefits from reflexology that do actually heavily get supported by science and by studies. And we are moving in that direction. The industry is moving more in the direction of more standardized training, better training with more hours. Our program is 300 hours program for the foundation course. And of course, we've got a bazillion advanced courses if your passion's taken there. So I just want to really hopefully spread the excitement, hopefully help you understand that you really can help people. You can help yourself. People can help themselves. And it's just a growing and beautiful modality within an industry that really is learning more about itself. So I hope that some of you guys are inspired. I hope that some of you decide to contact us about some of our courses. We'd be happy to have you and happy to meet with you. And I had asked that people hold their questions till the end. So I have Crystal, my assistant, with me, Team Reflexology, Team ASR, and she's going to read a few questions that might have come in. Quick apology for last time. I didn't see, we're relatively new at this. I didn't see a whole bunch of questions that had come up. So some questions went unanswered last time. I'll try better this time. Okay, guys.
Okay, so one of the questions we have is, do I need a medical background or experience in order to become a reflexologist?
Okay, so reflexology training, I'm located in Canada. Our school is located in Canada. The Canadian guidelines, it is not federally or provincially regulated in terms of an industry. It's an industry that regulates itself, which means it has professional associations that help to regulate it with, hopefully a certain level of training, code of ethics, your scope of practice, etc. You do not have to be a medical professional in Canada. Sometimes some states in the US will require that you are first a massage therapist or some kind of medical practitioner before you take your training. So be sure you check with local guidelines before you take any training to make sure that you can actually practice it in your area, wherever you are in the world. But generally speaking, no, especially not for a foundation course. I know there's some parts of the world where you do have to have some kind of medical training first, but that is not the case in Canada for sure. So that's just something you're gonna have to check yourself.
Okay, another question we have is, do you need special tools to work with when you do reflexology?
These are your special tools. You could use special tools. Some of the studies I mentioned were using like a little electric impulse stimulator. Typically, some of the Asian reflexologies, like Thai reflexology or Chinese reflexology, might use a tool like a stick. But no, you really just need your hands. And you can get every reflex with your hands. Even when we teach advanced reflexology, and sometimes we do something that kind of like looks for a congested area within a reflex, and that could shrink down to a really tiny little spot. There's one particular reflexology method that's called a hook, where you roll up onto your nail and you kind of go in and down. But you can even use your fingernail on tiny, tiny micro reflexes and little tiny areas of congestion. You're just doing that cooperatively with your client because it might be a little bit tender when you're working it, but hands. I just use hands.
And the most popular question is, do you offer clinical reflexology?
Okay, so clinical reflexology, the short answer is yes, we do. We have a course that is about clinical reflexology. How do you gear your practice towards clinical reflexology? But our foundation course, I teach it from a clinical perspective. So it's still a foundation course. You're still learning everything from the ground up. You're learning a routine, you're learning the maps, you're learning how do you create a treatment protocol, and then you go off and do your practicum and you see the effects of what you've actually learned, followed by examinations. We do actually take it further than that for people that do want to like really specialize, because we have advanced reflexology courses that are about kind of palpating and sensing congestion within a reflex. Generally speaking, you're just doing a technique and your client tells you, ooh, that's tender, or you feel a little bit of a deposit of some kind, a little tiny ball or a little crystal under the skin. Tender reflexes might be sore, and so you go back and rework them. But with advanced reflexology, you can learn a much finer touch, and you can also learn different methodology to work with those, including way more advanced anatomy. For instance, with maybe craniosacral reflexology or lymphatic reflexology, you learn a lot more about those particular systems, and then which reflexology methods would kind of key into those. So, oh my gosh, I forgot the question, what it was. Do we offer clinical reflexology? Yes. Almost all our reflexology I would consider to be clinical. But if you really want to get like higher hours and like say earn a diploma and specialize, yes. And the approach that is clinical means you're following a methodology. You're keeping health records. You are finding out about particular conditions your clients are experiencing. You are breaking into symptoms. You're developing a treatment plan. You're adjusting it. You're tracking your symptoms. So that process is clinical reflexology. And yes, we do. Okay, thanks so much for your questions. I'm sorry if we've missed a couple of them. We are operating across several platforms. So I know last time we kind of caught a couple of things at the last minute. We're like, oh, messed up a little bit, but hopefully we'll get better over time. Now, on Monday, which is our next live stream, on Monday, we're talking about, I'll grab my little list here. On Monday, we're talking about mini treatment demo. And I'm going to be actually using reflexology for wellness based on a particular condition. So I don't know who my volunteer will be yet. I don't know what the condition will be. Maybe I'll even have a couple volunteers. But I want to show people that after you do like your reflexology routine where you've like stimulate the whole body, and now you're focusing on an actual treatment plan to help someone with symptoms, what does that look like? And what does it look like in terms of feedback with a client, the kind of conversations you're going to have with a client, and what do they feel in a session? So we'll do some actual real work on the next live stream. And if you have questions about that, as we're going through, I'd be very happy to address them. But you can kind of see what a reflexology session might look like in the treatment phase, in the actual, like, you know, doing the therapeutic part or the clinical part. After that, so that is Monday. We also have one on Wednesday, which is living your purpose in the healing arts. We have one on Friday, which is keeping your kids focused this summer, which is actually kind of the end of summer. So that also applies to school, including stuff that kids can do to themselves as self-reflex manipulating or stimulating, which can help calm, which can help with anxiety, which can help with focus and brain activity. Okay. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm so happy that you guys tuned in. Very happy to be in this community. And if you guys want to contact us for any reason whatsoever or look at our course offerings, it is ASR. No, it isn't. It's reflexologyasr.com. Thanks. Bye, guys.